Bump Love is brought to you by
Use your hands to nurture, not to destroy a child's life. Call toll-free line 116 to report any cases of child violence in your community.
Hello and welcome back to Bump Love. Every year on 16th June, we celebrate the Day of the African Child. The theme this year is eliminating harmful practices against or affecting children. And so this week we want to zero in on physical violence and how it affects our children. Joining us on this conversation is Sharon Twikirize. She is a child protection specialist with Joining Forces for Children. She's a wife, a mother, a lawyer, and a passionate child rights activist. Welcome to the show, Sharon.
Thank you, Manuela.
So good to have you.
Thank you.
So let's start from the basics, the foundation. Please define physical violence, because we see these people abroad saying just a simple slap here, that it is physical violence. Please define this physical violence and give us examples so that we know who to arrest.
Okay, thank you, Manuela, and I'm very happy to be here. Physical violence is one of the 4 forms of violence against children. We have sexual violence, physical violence, we have emotional or psychological violence, and then we have neglect. Today we are talking about physical violence, and it's simply inflicting pain on the body of a child. There are many examples that we can talk about, but first to say that it is so common and so widely accepted among our society, and so many people do not even recognize it as a form of violence. Another thing I want to say is that it's one of the forms of violence where boys experience more violence than the girls, with 7 in 10 boys experiencing violence in Uganda, and this physical violence in Uganda, and then 6 in 10 girls. And then also to say that the first incidence of physical violence on a girl is by the mother, and then on the boys is by the father. So that's really interesting to note. Yes, and when it comes to examples, the common one would be caning. But if I said caning, I would be narrowing it down. I want to say beating. Beating simply with canes, belts, and for many parents, because there is anger usually involved, whatever is really near you, you will use. For mothers, a mingling stick, a shoe, slippers. I feel like those who say go and pick the stick from the tree are really, really patient. And I think that gives room for you to even change your mind, to cool down. Yeah, so there is beating, but there is pinching. And then in schools, we have incidences of children being told to kneel in the sun and hold bricks for hours. But you also have mopping and digging large pieces of land and areas that you know you'll miss class, that are not commensurate to your age, and it really can be painful.
And I think you rightly put it that a lot of the communities, especially here in Africa, look at it's normal, yes, you know, that when I cane my child, I'm disciplining them, I'm putting them on the straight and narrow. And you also talked about fathers and their sons, mothers and their daughters. I imagine where that's coming from is, I don't want you to turn out like me or that other girl I saw in the neighborhood. I'm going to smack the living daylight out of you. But yeah,
that or it's the gender roles, which kind of say mothers have the role of instilling certain behavior in their daughters, and then fathers have the role of instilling certain behaviors in their sons.
We've got it twisted. People even start as early as babies breastfeeding. He has beaten. Inflict pain. Give a slap.
That's one solution.
Yeah, if it bites you, also pinch.
You pinch.
Bites back.
So that he knows. Yeah, but you see the end goal here is that we're trying to discipline. So maybe define for us the boundaries, or help us figure out what the boundaries are between disciplining and inflicting pain on your child.
Discipline does not necessarily have to be negative. in fact, it's positive. It takes a more nurturing form, and you expect positive behavior to come out of it. On the contrary, if you inflict physical violence, unfortunately, even though you might get an immediate remedy, say you're stopping a child at that point from stealing, they might not steal just because, you know, they'll stop stealing because you've said it and because you've beaten them. Disappear for a minute, they will probably do it. You're not there to see them. So physical violence usually does not have any positive long-lasting effect, and it is in itself, it is violence. It is violence. Before we even talk about its effects, you're inflicting violence on a person, on a child.
So what are the alternatives, I guess? So for somebody watching who is like, okay, so we don't beat, what do we do?
What are we left
What are we left with?
Yeah, I think on my end, I feel like more research needs to be done on that area to find things that work for us as African parents. But there's so much research that has been done around that, and we have things like withdrawing privileges. One day I was on radio and someone said, privileges, look at your context and you see those things that you consider really that privilege, or that, you know, you can replace for that day, so that you instill a certain behavior in a child. But you have options of speaking to the child. You have restitution, that if they broke a child's pencil or took their book, they return it, they replace it. But you also have apologies. It can be written or it can be verbal. But also things like timeout, you know, you ask them to go to their rooms, or, you know, go and think about their actions. They do actually work, and then come up and give you feedback. What do you think you did something good? And then they will tell you what they think, and you'll have a conversation around it.
Maybe it's because we were just beaten and told to keep mum, shut up, don't say anything. But if you tell someone, go to your room and think about your actions and then come and give me feedback, you're raising an adult who is going to say, I've done A, B, C, D, E, this is how it affects other people. And this is not acceptable in society, it's not acceptable in a home. So I like that, go to your room, think about your actions. Here in Africa, when you tell me to go away, go in that corner, I'm looking at birds, I'm looking at, there's so much excitement around me that you tell me to come back to think about my thoughts. I'm like, huh? What did I do? I can't remember. So I like the first statement that you said about the need for research to be done on what works in the African context, because timeout might not work for our African children who are like, timeout. Bianca would start sewing on the floor. She would start doing something. You know, you can't, you know, so I like that statement. I thought I should say that.
I think I also like that, adding on to that, you look at your child, because the children are different, and what they love. Even in the villages, it could just be going to see auntie. Maybe they go there every day and they like it, and you're cutting that off. So it's not like there's no privilege at all. It's what your child loves the most. You'll say, Dean, don't watch TV. He's like, I don't care, because they are not for TV. They would prefer to, you know, maybe they would even prefer to be alone in their room. So just...
But also one of the models that we are using as Joining Forces, called Parenting Without Violence. It has conversations you have with parents and then with children, and then in certain conversations you bring them together so that, you know, that this information is shared amongst each other. And it has modules around gender and gender beliefs and demystifying those, so that you demobilize those very negative ones, bringing us back to harmful practices. Because, you know, things like the African child's ears are in the buttocks. How? God created me with ears here for you. How do you place them in my buttocks? So, you know, so we have conversations around that, including conversations around spare the rod and spoil the child. Yes, and then you also have conversations with parents on stress. You know, there are so many things that bring stress on parents, And stress is one of the drivers of violence. We were talking about that video earlier of a parent who actually had a physical fight with that child. No, you could see the child had she had sent him with 5,000, then he took the whole day, never came back. And he took my 5,000, and you're like, hey, you know, and you beat a child to that extent. So how do we manage stress as parents, but also working with them through their family dreams and goals? What do you want to see your children when they are adults? So that you work backward. You know, you're like, what do I need to do to make my child like that? When you talk about things like parents you admire, what do those parents do so that you... And parents will tell you, I like the other one who feeds the chicken with their kids. All their activities they do together. Those are some of the things that are here. They do all their things together, so you see that children are learning, you know, everyone is involved, there is good communication. So yeah, it's quite an interesting model. Yeah.
Statistics tell us physical violence in children is one of the most reported cases. Why do you think it's so rampant in Uganda?
I think it's what we have been socialized to believe based on our cultures, tradition, religion, spare the rod and spoil the child. Those agencies of socialization that we know of that tell us, you know, children's ears are in the bums. The only way of disciplining a child is through caning. We know that also from school. Everything you have done wrong, including studying, like how is beating a child helping them to study better, you know? So it's what we know from our cultures. It is what those things that have been told that girls should do, boys should do, and then there are so many expectations placed on the girls, so many expectations placed on the boys, and when you fail to do them, the result is canes. Yeah.
I mean, you talk about religion and you actually quote the scripture on spare the rod and spoil the child. I read an excerpt somewhere which said that, and the jury is out on this, you can go and debate in your theological discussions. I'm not saying that this is it, but I read that the rod in those days meant, because you know shepherds use rods to shepherd the sheep. And so it goes back to what you're saying on the nurturing aspect. The rod is supposed to be nurturing, it's supposed to be, it's a guide, you know, you're nurturing your child and shepherding your child. But back to the physical violence, for you who are maiming your children and slapping your kids, what are the telltale signs that a child is being physically abused? And because we are busy and moving fast trying to make money, sometimes we may not realize that our children are actually being physically harmed. Or maybe a child is living with a mom, separate from the dad, and maybe when they go to visit the father, there's some physical violence that happens, but the mom needs to be able to tell so she can have a conversation with the father. So
yeah, so the telltale signs are many. They are vast, Rachel, and they don't have to be very visible. You may not see them pronto, like, oh, I have, yeah, but you may tell by the scars or bruises on the body of a child or a bump. You may tell by how, if a child, for example, was in your class or at home, they are very vocal. And then suddenly they are so withdrawn and they won't be able to speak. You can also tell by signs like we're talking about fear earlier. You know, you get to a child and they cringe. Like, you know, you can see that if a maid or someone or a teacher is or a parent, yeah, and you go to Sunday school, for example, and a child is asked to say a certain thing, and you'll see them quickly cringing and looking for their parent, and if I said this, is this wrong? Or, you know, so they're so fearful, so fearful. But other signs are the child is violent. Children learn a lot from us. Wow. So you'll see them at school beating other kids.
Because they're beaten at home.
Because
it's so
they are
funny that you say that. I watched a series. I know we're talking about series earlier, and and this wasn't violence to the child, but it's as a result of the mom was being physically abused by the father, and the kid was beating a child at school, and like they couldn't for the life of them understand why is this child hitting. He's such a sweet kid, you know, but like you said, the kids learn by observing, and they watch, and if pain is inflicted on them, it will be like, oh, this is normal, so let me go to school and beat.
You're not doing what I need you to do.
Exactly.
Some slaps.
Yeah. So you have low self-esteem as well. Someone who used to be very high,
vibrant,
their self-esteem becomes very, very low. So those are the kind of signs.
So what are the long-term and short-term effects of physical violence on children?
Short term, and I think you've actually answered the withdrawal, you know, low esteem. I feel like, yeah, you're right about that. Like some of the answers are in there. And then long term is they will become violent themselves, They will not be able to deal with their peers. These are people that can't sustain marriages because, I mean, they don't know how to deal with whoever, you know, will annoy them. They feel like beating is the quickest means. I feel like that really affects them in the long term. Something that we spoke about earlier when you were talking about timeout, that for me was such a light bulb moment. I think that when we beat children, especially without explanation or if it's reactionary, we take away from them the opportunity to learn how to take responsibility for their actions. When you simply beat and you feel like I have done my job as a parent, I have disciplined this child and he will never steal again. Yes, they may never steal again, but other vices are going to crop up. And in society, when we are working with people, when we are living in communities, we do things and we don't feel the need to apologize because we were always suppressed and subdued. When you do something wrong, you get chiboko, keep quiet, no discussion, go on with your life. And that's how they learn to deal with life. And such people are really difficult to live with. In marriages, in workplaces.
I think for me there are two areas that I feel long-term how physical violence affects children. One is mentally, because you see, when you don't always get what you want. Now, as parents, whenever we are spanking or whenever we are slapping, it's because we want them to do something. Now, you're going to go in life, and not everything goes the way you want it to go. And guess what? You can't cane it. You can't cane your boss. You can't beat him up. You can't, because and things won't go the way you want them to go. And before you know it, mentally, you're not there, you know, because if you want things to go straight and they can't go straight and you can't do anything about it. So you're caning your child, and in their heads they're like, okay, I think in their minds they're like, you know, as we grow, you just need to cane, you know, something and everything else will be fine. And then the second one is they have no way of dealing with conflict resolution. The only way to resolve conflict is to fight. The only way to resolve conflict is to punish, is to inflict pain. Or withdraw. You know, like I just feel like there are certain people in this world who you meet, they don't get their way or you don't do what they want you to do, and their reaction to it is, oh my God, you're just like, what's wrong? What's wrong? Like, I just owe you 5K. Why are we doing this? Why have you called my office, HR, to tell them to give you the 5,000 you lent me? Why is it? Why would you want to inflict so much pain on someone to this extent? So for me, those are what I feel are some of the effects.
I think we need to mobilize new ways of disciplining our children, nurturing our children. One of the campaigns we are doing called Hands for Good says, how can you use the very hands you use to bless your child, for love, to nurture, to guide, to teach, to also destroy them? You know, it's very, very confusing. But yes, those are some of the effects of violence. But like I said earlier, for me, one of the ones that hits me the most, you remember when I told you one of the things we discuss with parents is family dreams. How do you want to see your children when they are up there, above 18, responsible adults? And many people say, I want to see my children in a happy family with their wives together. Others will say, my children very highly educated. So then you ask, how do you get there? If you're beating them, it means they are going to beat their wives, they are going to beat their children. Also, we know the impact violence has on learning. So if you're beating children, scientifically, the brain gets smaller, and then learning is interrupted. It doesn't go as quickly as it should. So for me, one of the biggest things is, one, I don't want to see my children out there as adults resolving conflicts by fighting. By being angry unnecessarily, and beating their wives and not relating well in the workplaces. I want to see them much better human beings and with better ways of resolving conflicts. One piece of information we should not forget is to inform children, communities, parents, anybody really is responsible to stop violence against children. There is a toll-free line, the 116, that's our national child helpline, where you can report any form of violence against children. We spoke about them earlier, not just the physical, any single form of violence. Please report to 116. It is toll-free, and there will be someone at any time to support you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you so much, ladies. But like we've seen in this episode, anything that we are doing that's inflicting any form of physical pain, a slap, a smack, is actually now considered as physical violence against your children. And so I'd like you in the comment section to make a promise to use different ways to discipline and to guide your children, to teach them in ways that do not cause physical pain. Until next time, with love from Bump Love.
Bump Love was brought to you by.
With her hands, she slaps me. He pushes me into the wall. They even pinch me where they know people won't see. I have bruises.
Use your hands to nurture, not to destroy a child's life. Call toll-free line 116 to report any cases of child violence in your community. This message is brought to you by Joining Forces Consortium with support from the European Union.